yesterday because I read it last night. Afternoon and welcome to our school board workshop for general and capital funds budget. It will be presented by Sarah Graber and Dr. Shanoff. Would you like to start us off? I don't think we're on air.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is always a very poignant point in the year when we get a chance to look at the finances. But I think that it's really important for the community to understand that the implications and economic impact on K-12. And by the way, this is not just Osceola County, and it's not just Florida. It is all over the country where K-12 is having to scale back. So it doesn't seem to matter what corner of the country you're in. You are not exempt from making some very difficult budget decisions. This is just the reality that we're in. And so because of that reality, we've had to have some very honest conversations internally. We've had to take some action. And I really just want to say that I appreciate everybody working together and understanding that there's a much larger puzzle to put together than just one department, one position. This is about making sure that everything fits together so then we can achieve the goals that are laid out within our strategic plan. I want to thank Ms. Graber, our Chief Business and Finance Officer, and Mr. Gonzalez, our Budget Director, for their hard work in putting together the budget. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Ms. Graber.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Shanoff. And thank you, board. I'll just start there. I mean, this has definitely been a new world as far as school district budgeting the last couple of years. And it's getting harder and harder to kind of make everything work with our priorities and requirements. So I really appreciate all the support that we've received in all the conversations, and hoping for some feedback today where needed. So with that, I will get started. Let's go ahead and flip past the table of contents to the budget timeline slide on page I-2. So just to kind of talk through the whole budget process real quickly, of course, we had the early legislative session this year, which was then extended through a couple of special sessions. So we finally received the conference report, or the first FEFP calculation, on May 26th. I just saw about 20 minutes ago, I guess it was delivered to the governor for signature. So we'll await signature and vetoes. We are here today on June 23rd for our board workshop on the first draft of our general fund and capital fund budgets. Just for everyone's edification, this is just a workshop, so no formal decisions will be made today. After this, then the property appraiser will certify the tax roll on July 1, which will change some numbers. I'll talk about that later on. And then, of course, we'll advertise. But the highlighted lines are the board actions. So after the workshop today, there are 2 required public hearings. The first one to adopt the tentative budget and millage rates will take place on July 28th. And then the second and final will take place on September 8th. Before we really get into the budget, I wanted to cover some FTE information about our student population, which of course is how we're funded and what really drives our operational budget. So this first page, I-3, is just a historical graph showing our total unweighted full-time equivalent students, and this does include the family empowerment scholarships now and charters. So this is the whole picture for all of Osceola as included in our state funding. So you can see the numbers at the bottom and the percentage increases each year. So we are projected to increase by 1.63% going into next year. And we'll get into the breakdown of that between traditional charter and scholarship. The next page kind of breaks that down between the categories over the last 10 years. So you can see in the blue section at the bottom, there hasn't been a whole lot of growth in our traditional schools as compared to overall in the county. And we are, as you all know, this year we did experience about 1,000 kids down, or 1,000 FTE down in our traditional schools. So that's really hurting us as far as the numbers go. But you can obviously see here the orange section at the top is the growth in scholarships, and then the green is our charter schools. So. The next page just shows the information a little bit differently. Instead of the numbers, this shows it as a percentage for each category. So again, you can see the increase in the scholarship category, the decrease in the traditional category, and then charters there in the middle, which we've pretty much maintained our charters around 22% for several years now. The next 2 pages are a breakdown of the comparison between the year that just ended and the coming year, broken down by individual school. So the only things I really wanted to highlight here, obviously, if you look at the right-hand column, you'll see all the red. That is our declining enrollment situation. And these are obviously projections, so we hope, and we're going out there and doing everything we can to try and get our students back into our schools. Hopefully these numbers won't look quite as bad by the time August and September roll around, but these are the projections that the budget is based off of for now. And you can see some of the only schools that really have significant growth are Reedy Creek and Osceola, where we've recently done our renovations and added more seats back in. Of course, the new high school, Nova Lakes, and then a little bit of growth still, Voyager and West Side. So we know those areas are still continuing to grow. On the next page, you'll see the charter schools. The charter school total is projected to decline by another 170. So they're experiencing some of that declining enrollment as well. And then the family empowerment scholarships on line 96 there, you can see that projection is expected to increase by another 1,600 students, or 13.7%. So that's the projected increase in our FES for next year. And of course, that the overall increase of 1,369 is that 1.63% increase. So that's everything on FTE. The next page in your packet is the estimate of the tax roll that was required to be released on June 1st. So this is, the legislature uses one number at the beginning of the year as they're going through session. That number is actually about $3 billion higher than what's reflected here in this June 1st estimate. This number will never actually end up in the budget. We now wait until the property appraiser officially certifies the roll on July 1st, and then that number is what will be incorporated into the next round of the budget. We usually see this go up a little, sometimes kind of goes down for the June 1st estimate, and then we see it go back up a little bit more. This next page is our tax millage and levy over time. So at the very top, you can see the millage rates, and that very top line for the required local effort, or RLE millage rate, you can see just over this 10-year period has gone down from 4.5 to just over 3 mils. So that is continued to roll back each year as the tax roll increases. The millage rate has declined. And then, of course, we have the 0.748 discretionary that we always levy. It allows us to participate in getting that discretionary compression adjustment through the FEFP program. And our capital outlay millage of 1.5%, which is the maximum we're allowed to levy for capital outlay. You'll also see a couple of lines with zeros on here, so I do just want to point out under operating that you'll see the supplemental discretionary line. So districts that have the extra voted mill, or if we were to receive that in the future, that's where that would show up there and then get incorporated into the tax levy calculation. The graph in the middle of the page is just showing the total tax roll increase, which is right below that. Again, the number used in the conference report of $66.7 billion does represent an increase of 6.88%. That June 1st estimate, which I mentioned is a little bit lower, would have us at about a 2% increase in the tax roll. So expect it to come in somewhere in between there. And then the last line on here is just showing the actual levy, which is the tax roll times the millage rates above. Oh, and that represents both operating and capital. The next page, I-10, is the comparison of the actual FEFP, or Florida Education Finance Program, calculation between 2026 and 2027. Couple of things I want to just highlight and bring your attention to on here. At the top is the FTE section. So again, we've discussed these numbers already, but the 1.63% overall increase, of course, broken down by an increase in family empowerment and a decrease in both traditional and charter projections. Then the tax roll and the millage rates. And then on line 15, the base student allocation, or the BSA, an increase of $85 this year. Keep in mind that the teacher salary allocation is now in the base, so you won't actually see that broken out anywhere on this document. But that money that has to be spent on the teacher salaries now 10 years and above, that is baked into that $85 increase per student.
And how much of the $85 would that be?
We tried to look at that the other day. Do you remember do you remember where we ended up on that? Okay, we were trying to look. It's a little less than half, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Other things I just wanted to point out, I know some things went back and forth between session, but they did land on no increase to safe schools or mental health allocation. That you'll see a little bit of an increase there for Osceola just due to workload, but the actual statewide allocation was not increased in those areas. And then the academic acceleration options, which was the new categorical last year for AP, IB, industry certs, that is no change. So you'll see that on line 26, our number stayed exactly the same. So that dollar amount was actually frozen by district as well. So regardless of what we qualify for those categories, it's the same pot of money. So they'll just be divvied up differently. The last thing on this page is just at the very bottom, of course, an increase of $151 per student or per FTE, which is a 1.73% increase, again, including the teacher salary money within that increase. And you guys feel free to stop me if you have questions. Okay. Next page, I-11. Again, just a couple more graphs of showing over time our increases. This one doesn't mean a whole lot anymore. It used to show a pretty drastic difference between total funding versus funding per student. But now with scholarships in here, it's basically just a graph showing our growth. So. The next page is our ranking amongst the Florida school districts in per student funding. I know you're used to seeing this and used to seeing us at the bottom. We're not last, although I would say Hendry is an outlier because they are so heavily virtual. So by the nature of the operation that district is running, their virtual funding is less than our regular average student funding. And this is average of the funding that all of our students receive. So this number in and of itself is not how much any individual student gets. It's just an average. Well, for those of you who haven't been around forever, just a couple of things as to why we're always near the bottom. So the two biggies are really districts that have higher property values that are able to keep the amount over average. So if you look at the districts near the top of the list, you'll see kind of the coastal property rich districts, as well as the other thing is the significantly smaller districts. They get more on a average per student basis because there's certain minimums baked into components of the formula. So that's really why this list doesn't change a whole lot over time, because the mechanisms that are driving all of the individual components really kind of play to those factors when you look at everything on a per student basis. All right, so that was all of the intro information. Now let's move into the actual general fund budget. So this first page is just kind of a one-page summary of the whole general fund budget. You'll see at the top the beginning fund balance of $62.1 million. That is our estimated projection as of right now, where we think we're going to end the current year. So again, we're still a lot of things in play. We're still closing out the year, making final payments. We don't have our June healthcare claims yet. There's some other liability estimates that will change, but that is our best forecast as of the publishing of this document. So a little over $62 million. Then you have your revenues broken down, of course, the biggest being the Florida Education Finance Program, along with our school taxes right below that. Under appropriations, I do want to mention we get questioned a lot how much of our budget is spent on salaries and benefits. So the number you see here looks a little skewed because it shows 60.5%, but the line below that is our charter schools. So all of the charter school funding that gets passed through is in that line. So really, if you take about 80% of the charter school money and add it to the salaries and benefits, we're at about 80%, which is really kind of the typical amount that school districts spend on salaries and benefits out of the operating fund. And then, of course, don't pay too much attention to the bottom line on here. This is the budget if every dollar allocated was spent in the current year, which never happens. So that's what the $20 million of carryover appropriations represents, is the amount that would be allocated and potentially committed to contracts, but not actually expended as of the end of the year. So that's reflected on the following page. If we look at the long-range forecast, again, you guys are used to seeing this document, but I really want to focus on this. We've shown a few years prior, and then the highlighted column is the year we're currently closing out. And then we always like to look 3 years in advance, kind of based on the forecast that we have right now and assumptions that we're making at this point in time, knowing things will change. So again, forecasted to end the current year at $62.2 million. We did see a decline in our fund balance this year that was unexpected. That is primarily due to the declining enrollment and the third calc adjustment. So as we always do, we pull back classroom teachers right after the beginning of the year for students that don't show up, and we right size our classrooms. But that's only about 40% of the funding per student. So when we lose all the dollars tied to a student when we're in declining enrollment, it's more than half of that has to come from somewhere other than just the classroom teacher. And so that's what we really were not able to cut that much additional in the current as we move through the current year. So just coincidentally, the $14.4 million deficit was actually the decline in the third calc. So. And then as far as that $62.2 million balance that we're forecasted to end this year, that does equate to a 6.54% financial condition ratio. So that's the number we've been kind of historically talking about related to our strategic plan KPI. Again, hoping we can land close to that. But what's really more important for you guys to be aware of is the board policy itself is 6% strictly for unassigned. And so if you look at lines 10 and 11 combined, line 10 is the dollar amount that 6% would be. And so where line 11 is negative, that means we would be below the board rule required 6% unassigned fund balance. So that's what we're looking at right now. Like I said, still a lot to close out this year, and some things we may be able to move around. We're looking at using some more restricted sources where we can. Don't expect we'll be able to use up $7 million of it. So I just want you guys to be prepared that when we bring year-end close forward, and of course going into next year's budget as well, we will most likely be asking for board approval to go ahead and dip below that board rule 6% unassigned. And of course with that, if you then look at the 26-27 year, which is the budget we're building right now, we show that going down another $7.1 million, and that is based on the board's previous direction to go ahead and do that and build the budget this way, so that we could continue to prioritize and not make further cuts, prioritize compensation and benefits, and not make any further cuts for next year's budget right now. I do just want to remind everyone and highlight we did some very significant budget cutting over the last 6 months. So when we met back in March, the board made some decisions, and we agreed to make some significant changes. All of that was done, and then the picture continued to get worse from that point forward. So. Also, just need to highlight in that last column, 28-29, you'll see a further decline of $20.6 million. What that represents is some of the capital dollars that we've been using to help supplement operations. We increased last year. We said we could do that for 2 to 3 years, but it really wasn't sustainable at that level. So we have that baked in here, and the 28-29 year is really when that will catch up with us, and we need to start planning for that. So. All right, let's see. talked about all that. All right, moving on to the next page. The next 2 pages is the details of all of the line item allocations. I know this is really small. I'm going to talk through a couple of them, and of course you guys can study this in more detail and ask me questions if you have specific questions. But I do just want to jump to the totals on the second page first. You'll see that and this is 3 years, so this is how much was actually spent last year or the previous year, the final 24-25 expenditures, the current year 25-26 allocation, and then the recommendation for next year's budget. So if you look at that grand total line on 121, you'll see that it went up about $4 million this year and it's projected to go up another just under $3 million next year. So wanted to kind of drill into what are those increases. So some of this is reimbursed through capital. Some of this is those capital transfers that we've talked about, not salaries, but other non-salary expenditures. So that little box at the bottom breaks it down and shows FEFP dollars versus capital and local. So you can see that the capital amount is what increased from 11.8 to 14 to next year's 16.8. So that's specifically items that are in here that will be reimbursed from capital, but the FEFP itself has grown about 1.7 million. So I really wanted to kind of dig into what were some of those larger increases. So just want to point out, of course, with our ERP project, we've hired consultants to help us work through that entire process. So we had that number was a little bit higher during the period when we were doing all of the process mapping and the RFP process itself. And then moving forward, there is a contract on your agenda tonight to extend their contract moving forward to continue to help us with project management and change management communications areas. So that's in here. The computer leasing program is in here. Again, that's coming in from capital, but we are, as we add more and more schools onto the leasing program, we're seeing that increase. The supplemental safe schools, that one is increasing. So we use all of our safe schools allocation to fund our SRO contract to the extent that we're able to, but the dollar amount above and beyond that we don't have in that state categorical is represented here as a supplemental line item. And there's some detail further back in the packet. We can talk about that a little further. The other one from capital, our major maintenance budget, we always tend to go over that every year, and Dave and I have really tried to sort of right size that moving forward so that we're being realistic about what we need in the budget. So we've added a little bit more money there. Those are really the big increases I just wanted to point out. So again, feel free to look at this in more detail and let me know if you have specific questions. So moving on, the next page is our educational enrichment allocation, EEA, or what was previously known as SAI, or supplemental academic instruction. This is that specific FEFP categorical. Our district is going to receive $20.3 million. Of course, the charter schools get their share of that. So after the 4.4 is carved out for the charters, you'll see we allocate a good portion of that money to salaries. A lot of our classroom teachers are charged to this pot of money. And then we have a little over $4 million allocated to other programs, other non-salary programs, and you can see that list there. I do just want to go ahead and let you guys know that our grants management team has done tremendous work really scrubbing this list. And there are a few things in here that we think we're going to be able to move into Title I, Title II, or Title IV funding. So that will alleviate some of this here and allow us to move some more salaries in. So that will help a little bit. It's not a lot, but every little bit helps right now. So yeah, the changes you guys, and thanks to Dr. Clayton, I know she did a lot of work with them last week trying to dig into this stuff. So those changes are not yet reflected in this version. The next page is our mental health allocation. Again, categorical from the state. We get that $4.66 million. Again, the portion that goes to the charter schools, and then we're left with $3.7 million, which is now entirely allocated for salaries for social workers, psychologists, and mental health therapists. The next two pages are the safe schools allocation. So again, with that pot of money, we're getting $6.4 million this year. After the charters, you can see in the first column of numbers in the middle of the page, this is all of our school resource officers by law enforcement agency and how many each school is receiving. So this kind of shows how that money gets eaten up. And then if you flip to the second page, you can see where that once that money gets exhausted, sort of in the middle of the page, that's where the second column kicks in. And that's where we're paying for our sergeants, floaters, detectives, and then all of the non-salary safe schools related expenditures.
Can I ask a question here? Yeah. With these salaries, remind me, is that their full salary? That's not. So what is the portion that we pay of their salaries? I
don't know if anyone is more familiar with this than I am in the room, but I want to say probably around 60-ish%. We were once upon a time at a 50-50 split, and then now we're increasing 7% a year. And of course, their total costs are going up too. Mm-hmm. So. Before I move into capital, are there any other questions or any discussion points on the operating fund?
Ms. Castillo?
Regarding the our portion of the officers. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
if you speak into it.
Regarding the salaries for the officers, you said that we are not 50-50. We're at 60-ish and increasing 7% a year.
Our current contract was a 3-year contract with a 7% escalator.
Look at that. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
All right, let's move on to capital. This first page just shows the balances of the entire capital plan, both capacity and non-capacity. So I'm going to go ahead and flip to the second page because it's a lot easier to look at this one split up. So this page 2-3 is our capacity component of capital. So this is everything related to growth. So new schools, new classroom wing additions, land purchases for new schools, anything related to growth is reflected here. And this is funded through our impact fees. So our impact fee revenue estimate has been updated as of 2 or so months ago. We talked to our business advisory board about that. So of course our business advisory board helps review all of our capital spending every month. We go over revenues and expenditures, and they help provide insight and guidance into how we set our forecasts moving forward. So you'll see that impact fee revenue estimate for next year is set at $61.8 million right now with an escalator on it over the 5-year period. That has reduced somewhat. We were around 80 plus million. At one point we were over 100 million. So we've definitely seen the slowing of growth. That is reflected here. And then, of course, working with our planning services department and facilities, we've updated the 5-year plan now as far as new school construction. So once we open Nova Lakes High School this fall, Our next scheduled new school opening would be a K-8 on the east side, scheduled to open in August of 28. So that would be our next school, other than the Voyager edition. And then, sorry.
Where would that be at?
So we have it identified right now as one on the east side of Osceola. I don't know that we know for sure. Okay, yeah, Dave's shaking his head no. So we've kept this somewhat open because it will probably end up being one of 2 or 3 sites depending on which one becomes available first and the logistics related to each one of those sites individually. So there's a little bit more in play these days than just saying everything's lined up and ready to go when we pull the trigger. So that's a constant monitoring activity of all of our land sites and where the need is. So regularly updating our numbers and our planning numbers to see where the need truly will be first. But we know it'll be on the east side. Then we kind of push some things back after that. So you'll see the next couple of K-8 schools here, and then finally our next high school have all been pushed a little further out in the plan at this point. So we would have our next schools opening after that in 2032. And again, this is a constantly changing document. So every year this will get changed, reassessed, depending on what's going on with our communities, student growth numbers, charter schools opening, private schools opening. So none of this is set in stone. Then the carryover section at the bottom, that is things that are currently in the budget. These are just the balances as of, I believe these are all as of the end of April, and they'll get updated in the next version. So, for example, if you look at like the AAA Nova Road High Schools showing $63 million still sitting there, that's continuing to get spent down. But there's no new money being proposed for next year. So those are all current budget allocations. Right, with that, we can move to the next page, which is our non-capacity capital budget. This is everything capital related that doesn't qualify as growth or funded through impact fees. So the revenues going into this section are 1.5 mil ad valorem capital outlay tax. Keep in mind that now is shared with the charter schools over a 5-year phase-in period. Some of you may remember 3 or so years ago that legislation was passed. So I believe we're about to enter into year 4. So it was the first year, they got 20% of their allocation, then 40%, 60%, 80%. After 5 years, they will get 100% of their proportionate share based on their student FTE. So you'll see that allocation growing over the 5-year period, or 4-year period. Got it. I'm looking at the wrong thing. Okay, so that's our ad valorem tax. Then, of course, our 2 sales tax, our half penny and our quarter penny. You'll see those revenues in here. Those are really the big ones. And then charter capital just gets passed through. So that was updated. I do want to point out the ERP expenditures. So as you know, the board started saving in preparation for the ERP project several years ago. So we do have some money set aside, but now as we move forward after implementation, our new licensing fees and contract will be allocated in here. So we have $4 million a year allocated for that. Couple other things to highlight are our 2 biggies, cyclical capital renewal and our deferred maintenance budget. We did look at scaling back a little bit there as we've needed to kind of free up some of those dollars to help us supplement operations. So the cyclical capital allocation, which is where we're funding projects that kind of come up on an ongoing basis. So not really a list to start the year, but as schools and departments have requests that come up, we look at that every month. That's the pot of money that we use to allocate to those projects. So we did reduce that down from it was 4 million for a long time, then it went up to 5 million. Now we are cutting that in half for this year, and we'll kind of intentionally slow some of those projects down just due to the budget situation. But these are not life safety issues. These are not emergency, urgent things. They're not anything that would be on the facility condition assessment or deferred maintenance list in that particular bucket. As far as deferred maintenance, though, that is based on our facility condition assessment and things that need to be replaced on a cyclical basis. So we have set that dollar amount at $25 million for next year, which is a slight decrease from the 30 or 32 that we had currently. And that is primarily funded with the sales tax program. Safety and security, we have set at $10 million a year, which pretty well covers our safety and security needs. What's not reflected on this document is what's not funded. So it's almost more important to you guys is what's not funded, right? So it's a lot of that deferred maintenance that will just continue to backlog. But obviously prioritizing what's most important. So we have just about fully funded safety and security, our school bus replacement cycle, and then, of course, technology. So I keep kind of joking that this is Pete's year because I feel like we need to fund the technology initiatives. So you'll see that in there. And then I mentioned earlier, but the student device leasing program, that is now in here instead of the purchase of devices. The leasing is in here under the transfers to the general fund for technology devices. So just due to the accounting of the lease structure, we pay those out of the general fund and then transfer the money in from capital. So you'll see that increasing the budget for next year is $7.3 million and then increasing over the 5-year period up to $13 million. So that is that continued investment and commitment to our one-to-one device program. The section under that is our debt service expenditures. We're actually 2 years away from paying off all of our certificates of participation. So that debt was stuff that was issued back in the early 2000s for new schools at the time during the previous growth boom. So we're just about done with our COPS program, which is kind of crazy. But you'll see the sales tax bond payments under that for about $30 million between the half cent and the quarter penny. So just as a reminder, that debt was issued when we first passed the sales tax program back in 2016. We've done 3 rounds of bonds since then on the half penny, and that's really what has funded and allowed us to get a jump start on the comprehensive renovations. So when we started with Michigan Ave, Denjon, St. Cloud Middle, Gateway, and then most recently Oxa and Reedy Creek. So all the money that was bonded out of sales tax for those comprehensive renovations, this is the debt service payments to now pay that back. And then on the quarter penny, we did issue debt to do the transportation facilities. So that's what that represents. And then down in the carryover section, again, this is stuff that's already budgeted in the current year, just not fully expended yet. So this will continue to get spent throughout the remainder of the year and beyond, but not requesting an allocation of any new money. And there's also some opportunity in here as projects get closed out. We'll be bringing project savings back to you. So Sharma and I already talked this morning. There's some pretty significant money in some of these projects right now that we think we're going to be able to close out and pull back. So I'll let him share that with you at the next round.
Good.
And so those 2 pages are really our full 5-year capital budget. And then the rest of your packet is just detail of specific categories. As far as the carryover or the amount in the current year, you can see what the budgets were for specific projects, how much has or hasn't been expended, what's still available. And again, this will continue to get updated But we include those in here because I know sometimes people like to look at specific projects. So that we have those detailed schedules for safety and security, technology, and then cyclical capital and deferred maintenance. And that's all we have in general and capital right now for you today. Again, these are kind of first drafts, and we'll be continuing to work on this with your feedback. Any other changes that transpire over the next couple of weeks, and as we continue to close out the year. And then in July, at the end of July, when we come forward for the first public hearing, we'll have all funds. So debt service, insurance, and all of our federal grants and food service will all be included in the next full version of the budget. So, any questions?
Any questions?
Good.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank
With that,
you.
this meeting is adjourned.